Today is August 7th, 2009, and my guest is Christopher Hitchens. He's the author of many books, essays, and articles, including the book Why Orwell Matters, which is our topic for today. Welcome to Econ Talk.
Nice of you to have me.
You start by saying that Orwell was right about the three big issues of the 20th century: imperialism, fascism, and Stalinism. Give us the flavor of what he was right about.
Well, to take them in that order, which is the order in which they occur, and also, I think, probably the necessary order. Orwell's first rebellion against power, illegitimate power as he thought of it, was against the assumption that the world would be ruled indefinitely by white Europeans, and that Indians, Africans, Chinese, and Latin Americans, people like that, would just have to lump it. He saw with great prescience that that wasn't going to last very much longer anyway, whether it was justifiable or not. He had also, as a colonial policeman in Burma, which was then part of the British Empire in Asia, seen the ugly side of it, and I think had guessed at the dirty secret that underlay it, the master-slave relationship, as Nietzsche calls it, and the unpleasant sexual side of that, which is available to you if you read his novel Burmese Days. I'll phrase it as crisply as I can.
It's a family show, so
of course, and with due regard to the values of that. The best way of putting it would be that the most qualified and educated Burmese man would never be allowed as a member of the English club in town, hard as he might try. But the least educated Burmese woman would be admitted to the British colonial officer's mansion by the back door as, well, at best a mistress. In fact, Florey, the policeman in Orwell's novel Burmese Days, has, it turns out, actually bought his woman as a concubine from her family, so she's in effect something like a comfort woman or a slave. I think myself, no one knows, because there's no writing about it that survives of his, no one knows why Orwell came back on leave and resigned his commission in that police force, but I believe I do know the reason. I think he thought if he went on doing it, he would become a sadist and a racist, and he'd already become a bit of both of those things. And it's a great help, if you're going to be an anti-fascist, which he later becomes, to have some insight into the horrible psychodramatic nature of fascism. It's the sexual warp that is part of it, the thrill of domination. And not just the thrill of domination, but the thrill of being dominated. This is eternally present in all of Orwell's writing. Gives him an insight that many others don't possess. He understands immediately there's something utterly wicked and pornographic about fascism. It has to be resisted. It's a life and death question. He hardly even writes anything against it. It's so obvious to him it has to be opposed. Goes off to fight, and early in Spain, and therefore that's number you can cross off the second of the two that you mentioned. He's a prescient opponent of fascism.
I want you to give a little background of his Spanish involvement for listeners who may not be aware of the Spanish Civil War.
In Spain in 1936, the Spanish people elected a government that was, broadly speaking, as we call it, Republican. It was hostile to the traditional ancient Castilian Spanish monarchy, critical of the power of the church and the undue economic influence of the church, generally secular, left-leaning, a great threat to traditional Spain, which replied in the form of a military coup organized from its African colonies by General Franco to put down Catalonian and Basque nationalism, which were also part of the Republican cause, restore the Catholic, Christian, centralized, Madrid-based unity of Spain on again, the traditional monarchist and feudal basis, and wasn't ashamed in this enterprise to ask for the military help of Hitler and Mussolini, which was what made it an international cause. So those who had decided that Hitler and Mussolini had already gone far enough, many of them were brave enough to take themselves physically to Spain to fight in the armies of the Republic as volunteers.
Which in turn, that side was supported by...
Orwell was one of those. Now I hope I've tried to succeeded in explaining some of the transition between Orwell's anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, anti-racism, and his anti-fascism and anti-Nazism, but here's where he becomes an immortal figure instead of just a distinguished one. Within the civil war in Spain, there was also a civil war. There was a civil war within the left, because as a counterweight to the support of Franco by Hitler and Mussolini, the Spanish Republic turned for arms and for money and for diplomatic support to Stalin's Russia, which was believed by many people at the time, many of the working class, and many of the intellectual classes too, to be a new utopia, to have solved the problems of racism, colonialism, imperialism,
class,
capitalism. Who needs any more to ask any questions? We already have a heaven on earth. It's on the other side of the Ural Mountains, far away, but ruled by a beneficent, godlike person out of whose bottom the sun daily shines. Joseph Stalin, Joseph Vissarionovich Djugiashvili, the greatest Georgian of his generation. Discovering that this was a huge lie and that those who believed it were capable of anything was Orwell's third greatest achievement. And he did it while he was accused of something that must have wounded him very much, accused of undermining the anti-fascist front by telling the truth. Put yourself in that position. What am I supposed to do? If I tell the truth, I'm going to be accused of undermining the left in its hour of need in Spain. I'm going to tell the truth anyway. I'm going to say what is obvious to me. Communism is a fraud, at best. And a monstrous tyranny, more probably. And I've seen it in action. I know what it's like. And not all your listeners will know who Czesław Miłosz was, but some of them will. Well, he's dead now. He died at the age of about 98. He was the greatest Polish intellectual of the 20th century, seconded only by Leszek Kolakowski. And he wrote a famous book called The Captive Mind, which was a big bestseller in the United States in the 1950s when he Miłosz, left Poland, having been a communist, left the Polish government, moved to the United States and began
That's the poet.
He's a poet.
Yeah,
a very famous poet and essayist.
Got the Nobel
well.
Prize.
Yeah, and Nobelist.
You just say his name so well.
It's because I pronounce it as the Poles do, because I'm such a faggot for this kind of thing.
Polophobe.
Yeah,
I mean, a polophile.
Because of the W's being, the being a special L in Polish. That's so you actually pronounce, it's spelled Czesław Miłosz, but it's pronounced Czesław Miłosz. Anyway, in The Captive Mind, he says that when he got hold of a pirate edition of 1984, which was being passed around inside the Communist Party in Poland, in secret, read by the cognoscenti, they were all absolutely amazed. How does this guy understand so well how the system works? When they found out who the author was, and that was an Englishman who had never been to the Soviet Union, who'd never been to a communist country, if that's not possible. He can't have got it so right without having lived under it. There's something wrong here. When you think that Miłosz is passing around a secret book within the inner party, and that 1984 is about the passing around of a secret book within the inner party, and it's in 1951 that he writes this, and about roughly 1950 that the book comes out, I think it's probably one of the greatest compliments ever paid by one author to another. Orwell never lives to see Miłosz publish this. Miłosz, I should say. But, in fact, in Catalonia, in Barcelona, the capital of Catalonia, Orwell had lived under, briefly, a communist regime, before most people had in Europe. He'd seen what the Communist Party was like and how it behaved when it was in the saddle, when it thought it was on the winning side. And he'd known what it was to live under a terror and to have people disappear without explanation and to have censorship and fear. If only for a brief time, it was a lesson for life, and for the rest of his life, which was to consist of another decade and a bit, he devoted himself to combating the prevalent illusion among intellectuals, which was that communism was the future. And, if you like, that would be a radiant and a nice future. He said it's neither. It's horrible and it will fail. And thus the closing years of his life, which are spent desperately ill fighting tuberculosis, see the publishing of a lot of very important anti-communist essays, but the two great classic novels, Animal Farm and As He's Dying, 1984. Mm-hmm. So that's number three, and number three is a synthesis of the previous two. In other words, I think in his 46 years, you can think of his life as being all of a piece, in that he was able to diagnose, analyze, and fictionalize, and critically oppose all the forms of illegitimate power of man over man, that the 20th century was able to